This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, Thou Shalt Innovate, How Israeli Ingenuity Repairs the World. What an honor and a pleasure to have with us Avi Jorisch, a senior fellow at the American Foreign Policy Council and author of the new book, Thou Shalt Innovate. Avi, what a pleasure and an honor to have you here.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Fascinating book. Before we get to it, the way that I introduced you, I don't think is enough. Avi, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Only you and my mother would say such a thing. I'm a senior fellow at the American Foreign Policy Council. I'm an entrepreneur, and I go back and forth between Washington, D.C. and Israel.
Avi, fascinating book. Also a fascinating story of your own, born into a family of Holocaust survivors. Hey, look, you were involved in getting a certain Hezbollah terror TV off certain networks in certain countries. You traveled the world getting countries to stop doing business with Iran. I hope I haven't mislabeled anything. Can you just tell us a little bit about all that you've done in your background?
Sure. For years and years, I tracked illicit finance and really had an obsession with radical Islamic media outlets, primarily focusing on Al-Manar television. Al-Manar is owned and operated by Hezbollah, a designated terrorist organization, an organization that killed more Americans prior to 9/11 than any other organization. And this particular TV station, Al-Manar, which most Americans have not heard of, up until a few years ago, had more viewers combined on a daily basis than Fox, CNN, and MSNBC combined. It had many millions of viewers, upwards of 25 million viewers a day, and essentially brainwashing its viewers into ideas of anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism, killing of American troops around the world, encouraging its viewers to engage in terrorist attacks. It really was a horrible, and I would even say illicit, television station. And I also followed the money. I looked at how organizations like Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and others moved and raised their funds around the world in order to engage in terrorism. And my last book, before I wrote this one, was on Iran's banking sector, where I looked at how Iran leveraged the international financial sector for its own means in order to continue marching towards the bomb.
Incredible story. You're doing a lot, Avi. Thank you for everything. Look, this book's so fascinating. We're going to get to the innovation, the specifics, and the details in a moment. You also give the religious, the philosophical, the theological roots of Israel's innovative spirit. Let's touch on that a little bit. You know, the Hebrew prophet Isaiah prophesied the Israeli people would be a light unto the nations. You talk in your book about the Jewish mystical tradition of when God created the universe and about how he had to make wonder and room, for the wonders of the world, and how he created these radiant vessels, but then that they shattered. Can you just tell that story a little bit? Because that's the foundation, in part, to Israel's innovative spirit.
So I say really, Israel's innovative spirit rests on three pillars. The first is the prophetic tradition. For the last 3,000 years, the Jewish people have been repeating the idea of tikkun olam, or repairing the world. And really, you can't go about for 3,000 years repeating the ideas of repairing the world, curing the sick, helping the needy, feeding the hungry, without that not having, that was a double not, but without it having an impact on the genetic culture of your people. And so when you look at the prophet Isaiah, who calls upon us all to be a light unto the nations, when you pray 3 times a day to repair the world, the Mishnah, the classic rabbinic body of teachings, no less than 10 times calls upon us to repair the world for those that are less advantaged than we are. When I bless my children on Friday nights, or when we do Havdalah, that is the blessing on Saturday nights that exits out the Sabbath, we say the separation between the mundane and the holy. And that is the very center of Judaism, this idea that we're taking the mundane and making it holy, elevating the world. And when you have a culture that calls upon you to do these things and you marry it with technology, it supercharges it in order to focus on doing good. Israel is one of the most innovative countries on the planet today, but it's not enough that it's just an innovative country. The United States is innovative, China is innovative, Korea is innovative. What separates Israel, what makes it unique, is this idea of focusing its tech on doing good. Israel today is a force for good around the world. It is leveraging its greatest commodity for the benefit of humanity. When it comes to water, medicine, science, agriculture, Israel is doing good around the world. Israel today, I believe, is acting as a light. And the stories that I feature in the book really drive that point home.
Absolutely. And let's get to some of those fascinating stories, but I just want to synthesize and capsulize this a bit, what we were talking about, the mystical tradition, the Judaic tradition, that Israelis, you show in your book, that Israelis believe that they are actually partners with God, that they share a responsibility in spreading morality and justice around the world, right?
That is true. Whether that is conscious or unconscious, Israelis are engaging in these missions around the world for primarily altruistic reasons. And it is exciting to see. Look, just this past week in Thailand, you had an Israeli delegation who went over in order to try and save those children from the cave. You look around the world, Israelis, when it comes to Haiti and the horrible events that took place there a few years ago, Israelis were the first ones on the scene with their hospitals. And so, look, Israel, when you have this prophetic tradition and you marry it, what I believe, with two other factors, you have both, you have great universities, you have a highly innovative military, and in Israel's case, resource scarcity, and you marry that with a very diverse population set. Israel has Christians, Muslims, and Jews working together for the benefit of humanity. So it's not just the Jewish people, but you really have here a wide diversity is the fuel that really propels the Israeli innovative spirit. So you have the prophetic tradition, you have diversity, and you have secular institutions like universities and a military. When the three come together, you have a technological powerhouse.
Right. And right now, just before we get to the innovations in terms of the details, there's one more philosophical thing in terms of everything. Just fascinating. I've watched you on your interviews, read your book. You talk about this combination of education, values, and charity, all combined. But then I love something that you said, Avi, that failure is actually an important step towards innovation. A lot of us believe, oh, we failed at this, but we got to remember, Thomas Hearns lost his first 7 amateur fights, went on to be a great champion. Just touch on that for a second, about the importance of failure and learning from failure.
Look, Thomas Edison, when it came to the light bulb, took over 1,000 times, 1,000 filters to create before he actually struck gold. In Israel, people look at you funny unless you've actually had a few failures. I was at a meeting last night with an entrepreneur, and he's done extraordinarily well. And he talked about his failures as really being key to success. That is baked in to the Israeli ecosystem. You can't succeed unless you have failed multiple times. Now, none of us like failure, but if we don't learn the lessons from our failure, you can't possibly succeed. Look, I'm sure many of your viewers have read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. And in that book, he talks about the 10,000-hour rule. Here in Israel, the 10,000-hour rule really entails, as long as you surpass a certain threshold of intelligence, of IQ, there's nothing that can stop you as long as you're willing to put in 10,000 hours. And here in Israel does something unique. It basically cases out its high school students. It plucks out the very, very brightest. It puts them in smart programs in the military. It gives them their 10,000 hours with big boy toys. And then when they leave, they found these companies. They start these companies that really go about trying to solve some world-class problems. And we're seeing that today. Israel is a country the size of New Jersey, and solving some of these global challenges like climate change, like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, cancer. Israel is now the world's one and only water superpower. It is water independent from nature and from its neighbors. We're seeing here a unique phenomenon taking place. Look, like I said, there are lots of innovative countries around the world, but in Israel's case, we're seeing a lot of its technology focused on doing good. And this is a story that when you turn on the news at night, you don't normally get this story, which is why I felt compelled to write the book featuring innovations that were not only innovative, but were having an impact, a positive impact on billions of people around the world on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And look, people are going to have to read the book to read about all of these innovators and innovations that you write about. But let's just touch on some of them. You just touched on one. What an incredible story. Israel, so much desert there. Egypt's running out of water. And yet Israel is a water superpower. Tell us about it.
So Israel is the only water superpower in the world today, and it did that by engaging in 5 different applications and innovations. One is desalination. Desalination was not innovated in Israel, but rather in the United States. But the man who created it moved to Israel a year or two after he created it and perfected it here at Ben Gurion University. Israel has 5 desalination plants, which provides over 80% of the potable water needs for Israelis. 2, you have drip irrigation. For you gardeners, for your viewers that are gardeners, is a small plastic tube that emits a third of the water but doubles the yield. That innovation in and of itself is being used by over 1 billion farmers around the world today. Israel is also a leader in recycling of wastewater. We tend to think of in the United States and around the world as wastewater, when you flush your toilet, as being a nuisance. Sewage is really a nuisance. Right. Not so in Israel. In Israel, it is a highly sought after commodity. When Israelis flush their toilet, that waste is removed. It is then cleaned 5 times, and then 90% of that water is recycled for its agricultural purposes. Israel also has an amazing system called Takadu, which sounds Japanese but is very Israeli. It's an early warning detection system in every major metropolitan city in Israel. If there's a water leak of any kind, this detection system goes off. And finally, my favorite, this is really rocket science, it's the 2-button toilet. Big flush, little flush, which was innovated in the United States but hardly used. When you combine those 5 factors together, Israel has more water than it knows what to do with. Israel is a water superpower. And you mentioned Egypt, a country that I lived in for a few years. Egypt is going to run out of water in 7 years. Iran, a country that today points its missiles at Israel, about 50% of its population in the next 20 years are going to become water refugees. I tend to think, and I hope, that in 20 years, Iran will not be pointing its missiles at Israel, but rather begging it for its water experts. And Egypt and Israel have peace today. And I hope that Egypt and Israel become much, much, much closer in the years to come, because Israel has the technological know-how when it comes to water in order to save its population from a problem of water problem of biblical proportions. Look, this is a problem in the United States as well. Israel and California signed a memorandum of understanding on water a few years back. For your listeners who live in California, Israel has built the largest desalination plant in the Western Hemisphere in Carlsbad, California. It has built the largest desalination plant in India and in China. Israel has the technological know-how to fight a problem that faces us all around the world.
Avi, and I think that represents perfectly all the other incredible innovations you discuss in your book. I just want to touch on one more before we close up today. Look, because of Israel, robotic devices have helped paraplegics and quadriplegics, and it even allows some of them to run in marathons. Incredible story. Can you tell us about that briefly?
Sure. Dr. Amit Gofar, a PhD doctor, snapped his neck 25 years ago and realized he'd never walk again. Became very depressed when thinking about the fact that the wheelchair hadn't changed in the last 2,500 years, innovated originally by the Chinese. And he went onto the internet and realized that there were animals that didn't have a skeleton, but rather an exoskeleton, a skeleton on their outside of their body, like scorpions and crabs. And so he created this device. And your listeners and your viewers, when they end the show, they should go on YouTube and watch this device. It hugs the legs, it has a battery on the back, and it allows paraplegics, as you pointed out, to not only walk again, but to run again. Talk about the lame shall walk again. The lame are now running marathons. And if that weren't enough, Dr. Amit Gofar, ironically, wasn't able to benefit from his own device. So he created 2-3 years ago a device called the Up and Ride, which acts like a Segway device and allows quadriplegics, in other words, those that don't have the arms and the legs, to walk, or rather to stand up, not really walk, but to stand up and watch their loved ones and see their loved ones eye to eye. What I want your viewers to really take away from this show is as follows. Israel is not only the startup nation, but Israel today is a force for good. There's no denying that there's no single narrative that fully describes the state of Israel. But so too, the country has extraordinary innovators that are bound together not by religion, money, or stature, but rather a desire to do good, make the world a better place, and save lives. Israel today is making an impact for billions of people around the world and bringing light. Israeli innovations are helping when it comes to medicine, science, water, agriculture. And these are the stories I felt compelled to tell that are featured in Thou Shalt Innovate.
Fascinating story, and even in the medical world, there's stories about curing or, treating multiple sclerosis, and in terms of even the Iron Dome protecting Israel. But I want to finish on this because just in terms of the Iron Dome and what it's been able to do and the innovation there, that we know that Israel is surrounded by enemies and all that anti-Semitism and et cetera, but somewhere, and you've discussed this in some of your programs, that under that threat, somewhere Israelis had to bind together, and there was a certain blessing in disguise there in the sense that there was an emergency mindset under threat, and that also yielded and enabled innovation, correct?
Correct. Israel is surrounded on all sides, really, for at least 7 years, for a large portion of the last 7 years, was surrounded by enemies, which forced them to think not locally, but globally, and solving some of these major problems. Look, for your viewers that have multiple sclerosis, there are 2.5 million people that have multiple sclerosis. The two top drugs, Copaxone and Rebif, that treat over half of those individuals, Israel. When it comes to Parkinson's patients, Israeli innovations figured out how to allow surgeons to get to the exact spot in the brain to pulsate in deep brain stimulation to bring those people in large part back to life. Solar energy created in Israel. Israelis today figured out a way to take extinct plants and bring them back to life. When you board an airplane, in large part the reason why your airplane doesn't hit birds on a regular basis is because of my friend and colleague Yossi Leshem, which figured out how to decouple planes and birds. When you surf the internet, you're likely using a firewall, and that firewall was created in Israel. When you use Google wasn't created in Israel, but the autocomplete function was. When you go to a restaurant and when you eat cherry tomatoes, Israel. I could go on and on and on. What's happening in Israel today is really interesting, and this is a story that most people aren't aware of.
Avi, it's interesting, but I think that there's also another word that could be legitimately used. Look, what Israel's done in 70 years, I think it's a miracle. And would I be saying maybe too much? I think it's undeniable that something divine is occurring here, or is that for another program?
Well, here's what I will tell you. 70 years ago, Ben-Gurion stood at the lectern and he said two things. One, he declared the state of Israel and encouraged Jews around the world to finally come home. After 2,000 years of exile, the doors are officially open. And he said something else. He said Israel was granted the great privilege and the obligation to tackle some of the gravest challenges of the 20th century. He seemed to be saying at the very heart and soul of the state of Israel was the idea of not only helping those, not only enriching the lives of its own citizens, but improving the lives of people around the world. And so when you, again, religious, not religious, divine, not divine, the idea here is when you, for 3,000 years, when you repeat these ideas of making the world a better place, it's baked in. Israel is not a perfect country by any stretch of the imagination. It has its problems like every other country around the world, but we are seeing here the striving to elevate the mundane, the idea of helping the poor, feeding the hungry, helping those in need.
Absolutely, Avi. I used to listen to Tony Robbins' tapes. I can't help from asking, should you be some kind of Israeli motivational speaker?
You know what? I think again, I'll end with you and my mother probably agree, and the only two on the planet, not even my wife.
Okay, Thou Shalt Innovate. All of our viewers are on the edge of their seats. They want to get this book. What's the best way to do it?
They can buy it wherever books are sold: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, All three.
And what if they want to follow you personally? How about a good website to go to?
They can go to www.avijorisch, that's spelled AVIJORISCH.com, or my Twitter handle at Avi Jorisch, AVIJORISCH.
Incredible stuff. Avi, thank you for writing your book. Fascinating book. Thank you for coming on the Glazov Gang. And please don't forget about the Glazov Gang. Okay, Avi?
Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on. And our viewers, Thou Shalt Innovate. Most important book to read right now. Go get it. And please remember, we're a fan-generated program. If you like what we do, please go to jamieglazov.com to support the show. And make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel of the Glazov Gang. Good night.